Today, I'm going to show you how to create 3D textures in Photoshop. Hey guys, and welcome to Phlearn. My name is Aaron Nace, and you can find me on Phlearn.com, where we make learning Photoshop and photography fun. In today's episode, I'm going to show you a great way you can turn any texture into a 3D texture in Photoshop. Now this is it's a pseudo 3D, but we're going to show you how to basically use the information within a texture to be able to add highlights and shadows from it. And you can change the lighting direction, making highlights on one side or the other. And you can use this technique. We're going to be adding it to text in this image. You can also use this technique to add any texture onto a wall in Photoshop and then change the lighting direction to make it look perfectly realistic. We got a great episode, guys. Let's go ahead and jump into Photoshop. So we're ready to create our 3D texture in Photoshop. The first thing you need is an actual photo of a texture. Now you're going to be able to download these 4 different textures on Phlearn.com. Just follow the link right down below. So let's go ahead and start off with our first image. Let's go ahead and hit open. And you can also photograph your own textures. Basically, anytime you see an interesting texture on a wall or whatever, you can turn that into a texture in Photoshop. Okay, so this is basically just a regular image. Now, first thing I need to do is turn this into what's called a Photoshop texture or a Photoshop pattern. So here we are on our background. I'm going to select everything. So I'm going to hit Ctrl or Command A to select everything. You can see we've got a border, a selection right around my image. Okay, now we're going to go to Edit and down to Define Pattern. Okay, there we go. Now you can see the color looks a little bit different, but you basically get an idea. This is our pattern. So we're going to just call this wall_1. All right, so that's the first step, basically turning any image into a pattern. Now, once this is a pattern, it's loaded into Photoshop's library. It's in the back end of Photoshop. So you can actually use this on layer effects, and you can use things like Bevel and Emboss with this pattern now. So jumping in, that's what we're going to show you how to do, and that's where things really start to come alive. So for this example, we're going to add some text to our image. So let's jump back into Photoshop here. I'm going to hit T for my type tool, and we're going to type in grunge, because this is a little bit of a grunge texture. Now, let me go ahead and I'm going to adjust the spacing so the letters are a little bit closer together. Let's make it bold, and I'm going to make this really, really big. All right. Now, keep in mind, I'm just doing this on a text layer here, but you can actually do this layer effect on any type of layer. Okay. So zooming right in here, we have our grunge layer good to go. Now, what I want to do is I want to apply this pattern over top of my image. Now, there are a lot of ways you could do this. You could just simply use this layer mask and apply this pattern. But what we're going to be doing is I'm going to show you how to change the lighting direction of the texture itself. And for that, we need to go into our layer effects. So going back to our layer, and again, you can do this with any layer. We're going to go to FX, okay, and we're going to go down to blending options. There we go. So here in our blending options of our layer effects, the first thing I see up at the top is Bevel and Emboss. So I'm going to go ahead and check that. Now with a Bevel and Emboss, it's going to make a highlight on one side and a shadow on the other. So you can see here's the highlight on the right side, and we have a shadow on the other side. Now you can change the colors too. Let's say you wanted to add your shadow, you want to make it a dark green. We're going to just change this blend mode to normal. You can see that now, if I just zoom in here, you're going to see we have a green on one side or the other as well. So you have a lot of control with this Bevel and Emboss. Let's go ahead and change it back to black, and we'll change that to multiply. Now you can change the depth of how much Bevel and Emboss you're actually going to have, and we're going to just choose regular emboss for this. Okay, so you can also choose to have this go up or down, and you can change the angle of your lighting direction. So clicking around this little circle here, you can see I can make the angle go from the left or from the right and change the altitude. So that's pretty much straight from the top, and then this would be way from the side there. Okay, now this is pretty cool on its own, but you can add textures into this to make it way cooler. Okay, so to do that, we're going to go ahead and click on our texture. There we go. And now you're going to click where it says pattern. You can see you have a lot of patterns to choose from. Maybe by default you'll see one of these patterns. Well, remember, we just created a pattern. We did that in the very beginning of this episode. We just selected the entire image and went to Edit and then Define Pattern. So now this pattern is actually in Photoshop. It's in my dialog box. Just scroll to the bottom and you'll be able to find it. So here we're going to go ahead and go all the way down to the bottom, and you're going to see this is the exact pattern that I just created. Now this pattern was created from this background image. So let's go ahead and hit OK there. Now you can move it around. Just simply use your move tool here and click and move this pattern around. Okay, so here's your actual texture kind of moving around. Now also keep in mind, as I'm moving this around, check this out. You can change your scale if you want to, and you can change your depth. You can make this like go in or go out. We're going to keep this at, there we go. We're going to keep our depth at, let's go to 100%, and we're going to keep our scale at 100% also. Okay, now here's the texture with the Bevel and Emboss. So already this is really cool. We've like literally turned this background texture into a texture for our text. Now you can also go back to your Bevel and Emboss and you can change the direction that your light travels in. Okay, so we're basically using the texture on our background and changing the direction of the light. Okay, so this is half of the puzzle. We've learned how to create a pattern out of just a regular texture in Photoshop, a regular photo rather. We've created a pattern and now we've loaded it into Bevel and Emboss, and now we have the light and the dark. But we don't have the color yet. We don't have the actual like color of the wall on our text yet. So now we're going to show you how to do that, and that's going to make really, really cool 3D text effects. So we have our Bevel and Emboss with our texture turned on. Now we're going to go right on to the very bottom where it says Pattern Overlay. I'm going to go ahead and check that. Now here with the Pattern Overlay, again, you can choose from a bunch of different patterns, things like this. These are going to be some of your default patterns within Photoshop. Now I'm going to scroll all the way down to the very bottom, and we're going to click on this pattern, again, that we defined earlier in the tutorial. So now the texture of the Bevel and Emboss is this pattern, and the Pattern Overlay is also the exact same pattern. Now in this case, we want to make sure that our scale is set to 100% here. Go back to texture, you want to make sure your scale is set to 100% there too. Now you can see in this case they actually are lined up, but let's say they weren't. Let's say like I click and drag this around and I go to my Pattern Overlay and I drag that around, and you can see they're not exactly lined up, right? The highlights and shadows from my Bevel and Emboss, they're not lining up with my Pattern Overlay. So I'm going to click Snap to Origin. So let's go ahead and click on Snap to Origin within my Pattern Overlay. We're going to go to Texture, and I'm going to click on Snap to Origin as well. Okay, and now we've got some really cool effects. So let's go back to our Bevel and Emboss, and within my text now, you can see I'm able to change the direction of the light. But it's not only changing the direction of the light for a general Bevel and Emboss, but it's doing this with the actual pattern. Let's hit OK there. I'm going to go ahead and make my background layer invisible. You can see you don't have to have a background. You could do this on a, there we go. Let's just bring that down there. You could do this on a white layer as well. So let's go ahead and I'm going to zoom in a little bit more so you guys can get a good idea of what we're actually doing here. So let's double click here on Bevel and Emboss again. And just bring that right down there. And now you're going to be able to see the texture within the letters. I'm able to change the direction of the light. Okay, and as I move this around, you're going to see the direction of the light will actually change depending on where I move my cursor. Okay, you can also just type in an angle there and an altitude as well. All right, so this is really, really cool because if you're curious on like how do I make a realistic type effect, you know, like adding texture to type or to a wall or something like that, now we have control not only of the texture, but of the direction of lighting as well. So let's zoom out just a little bit. We also have a few more controls that we can choose from. Your highlight, you can choose to remove highlights by bringing your opacity up. You can bring your highlights up, and you can make really bright highlights if you want. Same thing with your shadows. You can make your shadows either lighter and darker. Now it's going to be on the outside of your text also. Let's just go back to inner bevel. You have a few different options here: inner bevel, outer bevel, pillow emboss, and stroke emboss. So all of these different options will work with this effect. All right, let's go to an inner bevel with this. So now you can see I'm able to change the lighting direction of the actual texture, like on these cracks here, for instance. it looks like the shadow's on the right side. And if I shift this over here, now the shadow's looking like it's on the left side of that crack, which is really cool. And again, we have control over our highlights. There we go, as well as our shadows. Let's hit OK, and we can turn this background on. And there we have a really, I liked it on white actually. There we have a really cool three-dimensional texture here on top of our type. So using this exact same technique, again, you can do this on type, you could do it on any three-dimensional object that you bring into Photoshop, and you can even do this in a photo. Let's say you wanted to like make a wall in a photo look like it has a certain texture on it. Well, now you can add the texture and a three-dimensional lighting element to it as well. All right, guys, we're going to do this one more time with an additional texture, and you can download all these from Phlearn.com. Just follow the link right down below. So the next texture we're going to do, it's pretty much the same process. It's really simple to do. Let's hit open here. All right, I think this is a cool texture. I'm going to go ahead and rotate this 90 degrees clockwise. There we are. And let's go ahead and go to select all. So Ctrl or Command A to select all that. Go to edit and then down to define pattern. Okay, and we'll just call this grunge and hit enter. So now back here on this image, that's all we have to do. Now that pattern is in Photoshop's library now. All I have to do is go to my Bevel and Emboss, just like that. And where it says texture, instead of choosing that pattern, we're going to go down to this one. You can see we've got a new one right there. Go ahead and click there. Okay, and where it says pattern overlay, we're going to click here and go to our new pattern as well. Now you can change, let's go ahead, you know what, I want to change my scale because it was a little bit too big. So let's change this to like, let's change it to 20%. Yeah, that's pretty cool. And here in our texture, we'll go ahead and change that to 20% as well. Let's make sure to hit snap to origin with both of those. All right, there we go. And our bevel and emboss, now we can choose the angle of our emboss. So here you can see we've added another grunge texture to our type. It's so cool how you can get like both the texture and the three-dimensional lighting within the same image. All right, guys, cool. And that's our tutorial for today, how to add three-dimensional textures in Photoshop. If you want to do this on your own, just follow these key steps. First, start off by opening a photo of a texture. In this case, you can also download these exact textures from today's episode in the link right down below. Next, go ahead and select all and go to Edit and down to Define Pattern. Give it a name and you're good to go. Next, we're going to be using layer effects to give it a bevel and emboss as well as a pattern overlay. Go to your layer effects, choose your bevel and emboss settings, and where it says pattern, go ahead and choose the pattern that you just created. Go ahead and hit snap to origin and make it scale to 100%. Next, go to your pattern overlay. You're going to want to put the same settings in that you used for the bevel and emboss. So hit snap to origin, go ahead and put your scale at 100% or match whatever you used before, and choose the same exact texture. So now, whatever's coloring your layer is also going to be the same thing that gets the bevel and emboss. From here, you can choose your bevel and emboss settings. You can change highlight and shadow color as well as intensity. You can change the depth, you can make it go in or out, and you can even change lighting direction. And that's all there is to it. Now you know how to add three-dimensional textures to any objects in Photoshop. If you love Photoshop as much as I do, go ahead and click on your screen right about now. We'll send you free episodes every single week. And if you have an idea for an episode, just leave it in a comment right down below. We get these episode ideas from you. Thanks so much for watching, guys. I'll Phlearn you later. Bye, everyone. And do not forget, download the textures. They're right down below. Never forget! Do not ever forget! And do not forget! Okay, now we're just getting funny.